Hey, Econ Kids, this is Mod 75. We're still with externalities. Now we're going to talk about externalities and public policy and how you can use maybe the government to be able to fix an externality. Thing is, most of the time, businesses aren't just going to do this out of the goodness of their own heart. Very rarely would we ever see something like that happen. Instead, what you're going to have to see is, especially with something like pollution, etc., you're going to see that government has a role. They're just going to have to step in because a business isn't going to say, oh, you know what I'm going to do? Charge more for my price and make less. Like that just is not, it's not in a business's nature. We've done every unit so far from that point of view. So why would it change now? Government might have to come in and play some sort of a role if you want something truly fixed. So as you're looking at this, interesting to see externalities, public policy, and this is what it's about. So when you think about policies towards pollution, a couple things you can do. Number one, you could put in some environmental standards. Now, granted, you'd have to trust the people who are putting those standards in place, right? Like you'd have to trust the EPA is going to try to tell you the right things, et cetera. In today's world, people don't trust the government at all. So, they're more likely to buy into some conspiracy theory rather than figure out that, hey, there's pollution because we did it. So when you think about environmental standards, you'd have to actually trust the people in charge who are taking the readings on the air quality, the water quality, et cetera. But if you do trust those people and they do tell you like, hey, this is what's causing a problem and this is what it needs to be to fix it, you could be able to maybe fix some of these issues just by saying, hey, do this. And if you don't do it, maybe a fine of some kind or something like that might have to go into place. But if you just told people this is what they should produce, maybe they will. Like a lot of times cars will have like environmental things put on there like, hey, you have to be able to get this many miles per gallon, or there's only this much emissions coming out of your tailpipe, et cetera. Part B there says emissions taxes. You can do that too. Again, though, you'd have to trust the environmental standards to be able to say this is how much tax should be put on an item to be able to get the right amount produced. The last one is the market solution. So this is, if you're an economist, tradable emission permits is probably the best way to go. Basically what you do is you have like 3 companies. Each company gets a certain amount of permits to be able to produce, and then you trade them with each other. And if, for example, if it costs you $2 million to clean up your factory to the point that needs to be, able to function, then what I might do is I might say, well, $2 million is a lot to clean up. I need to buy a permit from somebody else. And somebody else who maybe has it cheaper, maybe it only costs them $500,000 to clean up their factory. They might say, hey, you know what? We'll clean up our factory for $500,000 and then sell you a permit to pollute. And then if I clean up my factory and then sell you the permit, then overall we will have less pollution in the air. It's just that the one factory is cleaner and the other one is just as dirty. So somebody cleaned up something. It was maybe the one that was already a little bit better made themselves way better, and the one that was worse just kept staying as bad as they were. And that seems to work, and companies can work it out. And then the price on the permit isn't set by the government at all. The permits are typically free. Instead, what happens is the companies themselves sell each other permits or trade them, and then they have their own value. And that's how it's established as like a market price for permits. So it's kind of an interesting way to go. Definitely what the economist would say would be the best plan versus trying to tax you or set some sort of regulation. When you think about private versus social benefits and private versus social costs, an externality would be considered a market failure, right? There's a deadweight loss to it. The problem is the market just doesn't do what it's designed to do because somebody is going to be suffering in this case as society, right? So can we fix it? And the answer is, yeah, we can. When you look at this one, this is a negative externality, okay? So when you're drawing a negative externality, the thing you have to draw here, and there's always going to be, like, it's interesting to see how we draw it because when we do a negative one, we're always going to draw the private. So in this case, our supply here is, this is our marginal private cost, right? And then we're going to have our marginal, this demand curve here is really our marginal social benefit, okay? And then we have to have a social cost included. So then we're going to have our marginal social cost up here, okay? So the cost is a little bit higher. This is, again, a negative externality. Negative externality, okay? Our price at equilibrium is going to be here. So let's just say P1, Q1, okay? And what we realize is this thing is producing a little bit of something we don't want, right? Little pollution or something like that. So what happens? If we have a little pollution, we have a cost that's a little bit higher. So in this case, our price here is P2, and our quantity should be here at Q2, okay? How can I get that to happen? Well, typically, I can't get a supply curve to shift or a demand curve to shift unless some other, like some factor has to happen to get that to occur. And one of the things we could do is we could tax it. So in this case, if I tax it and I figure out the amount, you can see up on top there, this is a per unit tax. And they say tax at this amount. Well, all you're really trying to do is, just like every tax problem that we've done, you're just trying to move that supply curve up so that we can get it really shifting to the left. We're going to produce less. So this case, the tax is going to be right here. This is going to be my tax. And just like every tax problem, society, there's a dead weight loss, right? And when you look at it, the weird part about these externality problems is the dead weight loss is not where you think it is. Now, normally, like this tax fixes a problem, right? So by moving it over, the tax actually benefited society. So the dead weight loss happened in the beginning. The dead weight loss is actually here, above our equilibrium point. That doesn't seem like it makes a ton of sense, but the dead weight loss is because you are producing too much, right? And society deems that price to be up here, but you're not doing that. You were at P1, Q1, and society wants you to be like, if you were producing Q1, they would want like a P3 up here someplace, and you're not doing that. So what happens is you tax this item, it pushes supply to the left, and as that occurs, my dead weight loss goes away. So we can cure a dead weight loss to society, right? Through this tax. And that is like mind-blowing, right? Because when you think about it, usually we say a tax is going to be something that is that's not what we're talking about, right? Usually a tax is going to be something like, oh no, like that's causing dead weight loss. And you might think it's that triangle down there, but it is not the triangle down there. Instead, it is going to be the triangle above until you put the tax on. Once you put the tax on, it fixes the dead weight loss. So that means this tax is actually a good tax, and that never happens, okay? That's an example of a negative externality. So again, always tax a negative externality. Now, what type of tax do we need? We need a per unit tax, because whatever's, like, every time we create a good, that's what's causing the problem, right? So that's called a Pigouvian tax or a per unit tax. Any of that would be acceptable to say. But there was a guy who came up with these ideas of these per unit taxes. His last name was Pigou, so a Pigouvian tax, and it just simply means per unit. Okay? That would be a negative externality. Oh, look, your cooking is so bad it creates a negative externality. Do we have positive externalities? Sure we do. Positive externalities are things that happen to us that we don't pay for, like some sort of positive benefit. Classic examples in here are things like vaccines sometimes would be a good example. Your neighbor's Wi-Fi might be a good example, okay? So again, we got a price and a quantity, and in this case, so here's my initial. Again, this is now, before we only did marginal social benefit and we had private costs, social costs. This time we're going to have your marginal private benefit, and this one up here is going to already be our marginal social cost. Okay? And then what's going to happen is we're going to say, well, this is, the cost to society, but here I'm only getting my individual benefit. So if this is something like a vaccine, right? I individually am getting a benefit of that vaccine, but society is having a cost of maybe like you being unvaccinated. So we can look at this and say, well, what is society's benefit here? And in this case, society's benefit is greater than the private benefit. But the problem becomes in this kind of a positive externality. So this is a positive externality over here, okay? The problem with this one is the private people will not pay this price, right? The private people are like, I am not paying P2 to get Q2. I know that it might benefit society, but I do not care about society. I would sooner get my, get my grandpa sick, and that's just the way it is, because I only care about myself. I don't care about society. I don't care about your grandpa. I don't care about anybody's grandpa. I just care about me. So when you think about this is like, okay, you're not going to get a vaccine because you privately don't really care about what society needs. Okay, so as you're looking at that's just a classic example. Like if you're an anti-vaxxer, then don't get vaccinated. It is what it is. But that's how we look at these types of problems. So in this case, at Q1, what society is saying is it has its deadweight loss up here, just like we did in the other problem with a negative externality. The deadweight loss is above, because this deadweight loss is society being angry that we're not having more of this vaccine right now, let's say. So what happens? Well, in this case, the only way to fix it is to get the people the cheaper price, right? Because the people on their marginal private one are willing to come down here. So what you do in this case is you subsidize. And as you subsidize, the deadweight loss goes away, and you subsidize this amount. So always subsidize a positive externality. That means you always want to give some sort of money, right, to something that's going to be a positive to society. Because then what happens is our deadweight loss goes away, because our deadweight loss was above. Now society is benefiting, so the deadweight loss goes away. And as you get that subsidy, it slowly but surely gives the people what they want at a price they're willing to pay. All right? That would be a Pigouvian subsidy, because you want to do it on a per unit basis. Vaccinations is a great example. The only one that I've never seen tested, but it is in your textbook, it's called a network externality. It basically just says that Twitter and Facebook are only more valuable the more people that are on it. So as you look at it, any sort of social media site, if you're the only person who's on that one, it's kind of worthless to you. But if more people join it, it's benefiting you. So it's called a network externality. It just means like as your network gets bigger, it has more use to you. I've never really seen it tested, but it is in your textbook as an example of like an externality. And that's it. So as you look at 74 and 75, both those modules dealt with something extra. This is the graph you need to know. Hopefully it makes sense. Till next time.